World War I series has just announced its new Gallipoli game. Yeah, an entire title focused on one of the most brutal campaigns of the Great War. Yet because of this, I was waiting around wondering, where have all the World War I games gone? You see, Gallipoli is promising desert battles, beach landings, PTSD-inducing bombardments, and I thought I would go back actually and look through some of the most current World War I titles that we have to date, and finally find once and for all the greatest World War I game of all time, in my obviously always correct opinion. Do you remember Mount and Blade Napoleonic Wars? Now, I'm very well aware that that is not a World War I game, but Mount and Blade Napoleonic Wars was a DLC that came out in 2012 for, of course, the game Mount and Blade Warband, pitting up players in this 1800s warfare environment. Of course, you had cannons, you had cavalry, you had muskets, you had rifles. You even later on had the implementation of naval warfare and firing at these huge sieges and being able to knock down walls. And it really started to integrate and well up in a huge community. Because of this community, you had clans that would form together and fight in these line battles, and they became incredibly successful. In fact, part of the reason I started this channel was because I saw these line battles and was absolutely blown away by them. It was one of the coolest things that I'd ever seen real players do in a multiplayer game. And of course, it was very successful. Now, of course, that was made by Tailwords Entertainment, but was it? Of course, Tailwords made Mount and Blade, and they've gone on to make Bannerlord, and they're making the new expansions, but they actually had some help by a company called Flying Squirrel Entertainment. Now, Flying Squirrel Entertainment, of course, were very successful with the Napoleonic Wars DLC that they built for Tailwords, and then later on, they released their own standalone game. This standalone game was called Battle Cry of Freedom. It was a North and South American Civil War line battle title, much like the Napoleonic Wars one, but of course set within the American Civil War. You had two sides that would fight against each other with full multiplayer battles, and it was, well, human beings online only, or at least really at the start. And these events would continue to happen. Now, I added some cool extra things that they couldn't when they were just tied down to what Tails wanted them to do. They could have destruction terrain, they could have environmental things like bees that would attack lines, they could also have much bigger battles, and all in all, it was a pretty good game. However, it wasn't incredibly successful. Battle Cry of Freedom was kind of a very niche of a niche. You see, Mount and Blade already had a fan base, so making a DLC with the Tailwords name for that game was always going to have an inbuilt player base, and they managed to grow off the back of that. But doing your own standalone game was almost starting from scratch, and having multiplayer-only line battles, well, it wasn't exactly the mainstream Call of Duties of the world, meaning that it never really got the huge player base that I personally think it deserved. They weren't finished. In fact, Flying Squirrel Entertainment went on to release another game, or at least about to release another game. Over the Top World War I is just like their previous iteration. It is multiplayer, clan-based warfare. And much like Battle Cry of Freedom, it is really goddamn awesome, with destructible terrain, with really authentic weaponry, and actually the playstyle for World War I is pretty goddamn cool. Now, this game actually hasn't technically released yet, but there have been playtests, and I've been fortunate enough to get an early version and access to it, so I can kind of give you my opinions on how this game works, but you can of course request to join these playtests when they do come about. The game is pretty much as you'd expect. 200 player large-scale World War I warfare. Of course, there are bots in the game if you need to, and some of this gameplay in fact is against bots because there wasn't a playtest going on when I wanted to make this video. But not just that, fully destructible environments have made a comeback. You can destroy bridges, walls, fences, dig trenches, you can alter terrain, you can actually get your shovel out and dig those trenches yourself, as you'll see in some of the gameplay. The battlefield is very malleable. You as a player can actually change it dynamically as those games go on. Not just that, but there's over 50 distinct weapons of SMGs, pistols, rifles, and of course flamethrowers, which are just as terrifying as you might imagine. Light machine guns. Of course, World War I light machine guns are very different to even the World War II counterparts. They're very much planted in placements, but they are still incredibly effective, especially when used on tanks. And there are 10 different artillery pieces and at least 6 different types of armored vehicles. Of course, the tanks, the very famous Mark IVs, the Renault French tanks, and those big boxy bean can type German tanks, which are terrifying just as much as they were in that All Quiet on the Western Front film. That thing still gives me goddamn nightmares. Much like if you've ever played many of these multiplayer Mount and Blade spin-off type games, you have separate classes that you can pick. Infantry, artillery, tankers, specialists, engineers, that kind of thing. Each having their own distinct gameplay, whether it is being a normal infantry and being able to dig trenches and being the frontline fodder, charging with rifles, being able to use bayonet attacks, or being able to put down barbed wire in order to stop the enemy or try and funnel them in a certain area. There are, of course, anti-tank weapons, which are mostly just grenades within this game. But all in all, it kind of feels like a very fleshed out multiplayer experience where there are 12 battlefields and a cool map editor, so you can play and create custom maps for the Steam Workshop. And like, oh my god, oh my, and the bots just charged. Jesus Christ. Now, as mentioned, there are no playtests going on at the moment, and the game isn't officially out, so a lot of this I played was single player, and there is some single player that you can do. There's a world conquest map that isn't out yet. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I'm assuming it's going to be this front-based gameplay where each battle leads on to the next one and pushing fronts, much like in the real thing. And of course, there are instant battles, so you can just jump into these battles versus bots, or you can build your own battles, set up these custom scenarios. Now, I love the fact that there are things like dynamic weather effects, wind will come in that will change the way you shoot, rain or fog affects the visibility, and all ballistics will take note of all this thing as well. And my personal experience is, it's actually pretty goddamn good. Okay, this is incredibly satisfying. I do quite like this. This is quite good. I can't see anything, but is that tank dead? I'm going to assume so. My bullets... Wow. My bullets actually ricochet off the tank as well. That's cool. Okay, that tank's very much alive. Kill this man. He's charging on us. He's got an anti-tank grenade. He's dead. He's dead. When I hopped in, once again, a lot of this gameplay is from single player against bots. One thing I did realize is everything just seemed to flow pretty nicely. The sound effects were good. The graphics were okay. I mean, they're not the most beautiful thing in the world, but this isn't a AAA studio. This is a small studio that have had, well, experience making small-scale games. It's definitely cool being able to mold the map as you play it. As mentioned, able to dig these trenches with these entrenching tools that you have. Now, there are some limitations to the game. It is, well, hard to spot enemies. That's definitely a minus, but kind of realistic to it. In terms of being World War I, do they really fit that World War I aesthetic? I would say better than a game like Battlefield 1, which is just charging around, and maybe worse than a game like Verdun, which has less of the push and pull, but at least the game mode I played, you had various points that you had to capture, and it very much felt like it was all free for all. But I think that definitely changes when you start playing with other people. Now, once again, these playtests with other people have things like voice over IP, so you can command each other, you can fire in lines, you can guard certain trenches, and of course the call can be given to jump over these trenches into the battle. And having that destructible terrain is really, really nice. I actually hopped onto a tank, and my god, that was one of the most fun experiences I've had. Being able to spray down man after man felt incredibly overpowered. It may be different if you're not just playing against bots, but here it is. I am playing against bots, so I felt like the king of the world being able to do such a thing. I think this game has so much potential, and I actually cannot wait for its full release. I just hope that it finds its player base. You see, these games, they often have a lot of potential, not necessarily the most polished things in the world, but you can tell a lot of love and passion goes into them. And I can really see that here. And I can really see that if it gets its player base, if it gets its community, there is so much to love. Much like Mount and Blade and its multiplayer events, this thing, Over the Top, can have much more of this impact. And I really, really hope that we can see that in the future. But I do worry that it is trying to target so much of a niche. World War I games in general aren't exactly the most popular, hence why I'm able to make a video with so few games, because there are so few successful World War I games, but also a game that is multiplayer only. Really, as much as you can play offline with bots, this is at its peak a multiplayer only game. And for a multiplayer centric game, a sufficient player base is so incredibly important. So release timing will really affect how well that does. Will the developers provide ongoing updates? I hope so. I mean, Battlecry of Freedom unfortunately hasn't really seen too much love in the last few years, so maybe they can sort of bring that back with Over the Top, and having a series of multiplayer games like this would be really, really great. I'd love to see a standalone Napoleonic Wars game one day, but for now, we have Over the Top. And I'd say, it's pretty decent, even if you can't play it just yet.
Bonjour! Une table pour deux, s'il vous plaît. La carte, s'il vous plaît.
Let's talk about Men of War. It's one of my favourite franchises of all time. I love the detail of being able to select your troops and put them in any position you could possibly want behind cover. How realistic moving around tanks feels. Using all of the statistics to try and understand penetration or battle types or troop types. It is one of my favourite franchises of all time, and that is no different when they announced that Men of War was going to get a game in World War One. You see, Men of War had always really stuck in World War II, and we'd had some sort of deviations into Vietnam and the Cold War with limited success. So when Best Way Soft said they were going to publish a World War One title within the same franchise, I thought, okay, this is an interesting new approach. They're at least trying something different. And did it work out? Well, let's really delve into that. First of all, it was made by a separate studio. Best Way published it, but they got somebody else to actually do the development, or at least under a different name. And this is kind of what happened with Men of War between 2012 and probably about 2022. You see, Men of War was kind of licensed out to many different developers. The original Best Way developers had kind of stepped back, and they weren't exactly the people at the forefront. That kind of had a bit of a negative effect. The whole franchise felt a little bit disjointed, and you had some absolute killer games that came out of this sort of merger with other development companies like Assault Squad and Assault Squad 2. But other than that, all of it felt a little bit higgledy-piggledy and all over the place. But let's talk about Battle of Empires 1914 to 1918. This is a game that came out in July of 2015, and, well, currently is not the most beloved title in the franchise. In fact, I would hazard a guess that it's probably not a franchise that many people know. It was developed by the Great War team, and it put players in the brutal heart, of course, of the First World War. It's the real-time strategy that you would get from Men of War, and it feels very, very similar. It feels like it's exactly on the same engine. It feels like it's pretty much all the same controls, but it replicates the mechanics and the atmosphere of one of history's most devastating conflicts. When many titles have used World War I as a backdrop, Battle of Empires really leans into the trench lines and the slow evolution of tactics and the birth of industrialized war. The conflict, of course, has the transition of cavalry charges and old doctrine colliding with machine guns, and they are trying to convey this within the game itself. Because yes, you can hop on the back of horses, and it is incredibly entertaining being able to do so. It is that classic RTS design with adding the World War I specific depth, combining infantry squads, tanks, artillery, and of course, having combat depending on the position and the resourcefulness rather than brute force. Infantry carry individual inventories, meaning that you can pick stuff off other people, you can pick up rifles off of the ground, weapons differ in caliber and effect, vehicles take damage based on armor thickness and angle. It's all the Men of War goodness that you can expect. The terrain plays a pretty major role within this game as well. Cover can be destroyed, new firing lines opens, you can put down barbed wire, you can highlight combat styles of different nations. Whilst there is a multiplayer and co-op, it doesn't necessarily exist anymore because, well, nobody really plays this game. One of the real strengths of this game is its, atmosphere. Being able to send off gas shells, flamethrowers, and grinding advancing of tanks, giving a really good, strong sense of the way that this war was fought. Uniforms and vehicles, of course, have been thought about pretty well, and they're, as far as I'm aware, is pretty accurate. Focus on immersion, really try and capture World War I's unique rhythm. It's a lot slower than Men of War in its World War II and Nations, but it still kind of works, but not perfectly. Well, we'll get onto that very, very shortly. You see, Steam reviews are pretty mixed. Players praise the authenticity, but kind of critique its balance and, well, its technical polish. Because it really isn't the most technically polished game of all time. In fact, it does feel a little bit cheap. And then it gets to kind of the actual mechanics of it. It starts to feel like the game is the same thing over and over again within the battles. Just wave after wave after enemy. That's not even to mention some of the issues people had with DLCs. Adding in things like the Ottoman Empire in a £4 DLC, and that's probably been cheapened at this point in time. And of course, there's more expensive DLCs that have come out for this game that have added in extra bits and pieces. So I was incredibly looking forward to getting up on this game because I have played a lot of Men of War. Men of War is one of my favourite franchises of all time, as already mentioned. And the fact that a World War I game was there, wow. I played this when it came out, and a few people did, but it kind of lost its player base very, very quickly, in fact. It didn't really last for all that long. The voice acting in this game is about as outrageous as you'd expect. The accents are, well, exactly what you'd think. The French accent, brilliant. Whoever's done the voiceover, I absolutely love this human being. They are absolutely mental. Now, does it really fit with the Men of War gameplay style? Yes and no. Of course, Men of War 2 also has bolt-action rifles, Lee Enfields, guns that were used within the First World War. And you get that within this game itself. And that stage feels really, really good. There is less on the automatic weapons, as you'd probably understand. But one thing that this game does is make artillery one of the most overpowered powerhouses in the history of gaming. These things can just blast people to pieces with no warning, and you cannot even charge an artillery piece whatsoever. They will just completely destroy you. Does that make sense? Kind of. I don't know if World War I artillery was that brutal, but it really does feel like it within this game. Now, the campaign is pretty bare bones. You see, there are 5 missions. Each of them make you play as a different nation. The first one you play as the French, the second one the Russians, so on and so forth. You can play as the British, you can play as even, I think, the Arabs, which is really cool, having that sort of unique spin on it. But yeah, they're very short. They're probably about 20-30 minutes per mission, and there's only 5 of them, which is awful. Especially for a game that doesn't have a multiplayer scene anymore, there is pretty much no sort of single player to speak of, other than a few skirmishes that you can put down. But in terms of actual campaigns, it is so lackluster, it is so few and far between, that actually there is pretty much no point paying for this game anymore. You can choose between the prologue and the multiplayer, or you can actually buy the full game, which is still £20. Now, this is the version of the game that has more campaigns in it, but for 20 quid, for a title that really relies on a lot of its mechanics and multiplayer, well, only one of these things is panning out at this point in time. Mechanics-wise, of course, you can pick up things off the ground. Your men, when blasted by artillery, will drop their guns. You have to make sure they pick up all their guns. It can be a little bit fiddly as well. Being able to place people behind cover is just as you would expect. Tanks are pretty goddamn overpowered as well in this game. Artillery, as I said, is absolutely brutal. You can even call in airstrikes and things still, well, artillery strikes. One of my favourite missions was actually defending the beach from the British forces. This was pretty goddamn cool. I really, really loved this, and it felt like you were really actually fighting within this huge scale war. However, the game is pretty easy. The enemy will just charge at you in waves and you'll be able to spray them down. There's pretty much nothing they can do, and you're going to get a pretty good chance of getting many, many kills within the game. You're able to jump in tractors, any vehicles. You can even drive trains within this. You can jump on a horse. Horses are still used to pull artillery pieces, and do they go by the clappers. They just sprint around the map. It's absolutely goddamn incredible. I do like that aspect of Men of War, but that's been in pretty much every game. In terms of the mini-map, it doesn't exist. Yes, this is a Men of War game without a mini-map, and that is actually incredibly not useful because you can't scan around for enemies, you can't jump between points. You have to literally move your camera and slowly creep from one side of the map to the other. I don't know why there's not a mini-map. That seems mental to me. The French mission, you pretty much have to defend a certain point against oncoming attackers, German attackers, and then a church. Then a church? No, a train. Why would a church pull up? Then a train pulls up. You've got to hop your men on it as soon as possible. Now, I got an artillery piece stuck in front of this train, and it could not move. I still managed to complete the mission, but it was kind of funny how I'd actually completely broken the mission, and nobody said anything nonetheless. Bombardments, they are absolutely brutal as well. But in terms of actually playing the game and the differences from the original Men of Wars, or any of the Men of War games really, this game just in general feels really, really clunky. It looks so much worse than Assault Squad 2, which actually came out the year before. So I don't really know what's happened there. It's just maybe less time is spent on the texturing and the assets because, of course, all the World War I stuff is new. There are biplanes and all that sort of thing. There are, of course, tanks that have nothing really in terms of likeness of World War II tanks. Artillery is kind of similar and the uniforms you can get away with. But yeah, the game just looks pretty bad. It's kind of a, well, disgusting looking title despite it coming out in 2015. But let's have a little bit of a look from the reception, because at the moment it's sitting on mixed, and unfortunately in terms of Steam, mixed is as good as bad. One review from pretty recently actually says, this is genuinely god-awful. This is one of the more important parts of the game, is that they do kind of avoid getting into huge battles because I don't think the engine can handle it. I mean, it is the Men of War engine, so it should be able to, but there's just something that's gone on where this game feels so much less optimized than any other Men of War game. And frankly, I think it sort of breaks the point of a Men of War title of huge battles. Nonetheless, I don't think it's god-awful. I think it's fine. I would probably give it, if I was rating it out of 10, a 6 out of 10. It's a fine game that you could probably get quite a bit of fun out, but don't buy the prologue. If you're going to get it, get the one that actually has all the missions. But it's still £20. That is a ridiculous... That's at a discount as well. Why are they charging so much goddamn money for this?
Scusi, ha un momento per commentare l'accaduto?
Imagine charging up the Italian cliffs in the midst of the Great War. Of course, when it comes to World War I games, there are none better than the World War I series themselves. Of course, this started in 2014 with Verdun, and then in 2017 we got Tannenberg, but I wanted to talk about the most recent game, Isonzo. And it's absolutely fantastic. Of course, there couldn't be a list without this title on it. It's one of the most infamous battles. Of course, the Battle of Isonzo was between 1915 and 1917 between Italy and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The game kind of focuses a bit more on the modern day FPS than the earlier titles in the series. As much as I probably could put every single one of those games in this video, I wanted to pick one that really encapsulated the World War I FPS better than the rest. And Verdun did it in a great way for 2014, having the lines and being able to blow your whistle to go over the trenches, and it really managed to capture that World War I aesthetic of the push and pull and the mechanics that made it unique to that time era. Then we got Tannenberg, which kind of did something a bit different. It went more open. It was of course set on the Eastern Front instead. There was snipers galore. The maps were pretty, but it kind of died a sorry death that never really took off in the same way Verdun did. And I think Isonzo is the perfect match between both of them. You have trench warfare, you have the push and pull mechanics, and you have the World War I aspect that makes it actually worth being set in this time period. It's not just an FPS with a World War I skin on it, which I think is incredibly important for these types of games. But not just does it have trench warfare, but it also has more open areas like Tannenberg did. Much bigger scale. Of course, you still do have bots, but the game is still active. People are still playing it, which is so rare for a World War I title like this. The Italian front is something incredibly unique as well. I mean, you can play in the trenches or in the rocky Alps, or even there was a cool game mode where you had to climb up these cliffs with ice picks and people on top had to throw rocks down. It was so unique, and I've never seen this done in an FPS before, and these are cool little events that they pop in every now and then. Being able to fight within these ice glaciers and these tunnels between the mountains as well is so unique, and so few games have really explored it. Maybe the fact that it is a AA studio and the fact that they are going into more niche areas meant that they are able to look at these smaller battles and actually get in depth of the historical accuracy, and this is something that is so important. The game is incredibly historically accurate to the time, to the weapons, to the uniforms that they're using, the battles themselves, and of course the map. They have some back-to-back screenshots of the real battlefields and the real places that these things went down, and then the recreations within the game themselves. And they are just so well done, and it shows there was so much love put into not just this series but specifically this game. Now the game is up to 48 players on PC and 40 on console, which is something that's only recently gone onto it. And the main game being offensive mode, this is not exactly like Verdun. It's not quite as push and pull, but it does do the attacking and the defending with lines on the maps. Yet, as mentioned already, the emphasis on trench warfare is a lot less than the Western Front because we're in the Alps now, so it's more fighting in the mountains and trying to adapt to that. Of course, you have your multiple classes: officers, riflemen, engineers, assaults, recon. I mean, there is a sniper class. Good luck trying to actually get to play as a sniper. It is so rare within these games because, well, World War I is very famed for having very powerful snipers. And it is no different here. If you play as a sniper, you are going to get the most kills in the game, so everybody wants it. Meaning that when you jump into a game, it's so unlikely you'll get the chance to do it. But if you do ever play as a sniper, my god, you're going to have a lot of fun. Engineers can use wrenches to cut through barbed wire as well, which is awesome. You can also play as an officer, calling in mustard gas, phosphorus gas, that sort of thing. Also call in attacks from planes that can fly over and drop bombs on people. It is very much a good mix between what we had in Verdun in terms of realistic World War I warfare, but making it more accessible and feeling a little bit more like a battlefield. In terms of its gunplay, it is pretty much a one-shot kill for everybody, especially with bolt-action rifles. Maybe if you've got a pistol, it might take two sometimes, but even then, if you're hitting them in the chest and especially the head, it's always a one-shot kill. It is very bloody and very, very fast-paced because of this. And not just that, but teams can adapt the games, and these maps can be dynamically changed. You can build forward posts and advanced spawns, place ammo crates and sandbags, or even barbed wire, which will kind of shape or block off trenches depending on where you want to go. There'll be points to hold like artillery areas as well, or just bunkers that you can hide in, and especially on some of the huge Alp maps, fighting on these tiny little ridges on the side of cliffs is very dangerous, but very, very fun. Whether you are going through the mountain warfare, the ruined towns, or the alpine landscapes, it all feels the fight. And because of this, it is incredibly atmospheric and era specific. So much unique terrain in here. The vertical nature of this game puts this apart from any other titles, not just on this list, but in the World War I genre and most other games ever. Like, what first-person shooter do you know that focuses more on vertical warfare than horizontal warfare? That just isn't done. And that is all down to the fact that they've gone to the Italian mountains that I don't really think any other game has really explored. Okay, there was that one mission in Battlefield 1, but that's about it. Underrepresented battles is, well, so ironically common within this genre. People only really look at the Western Front, sometimes the Eastern Front if we're lucky, but the rich visuals of the lighting and the snow-covered mountains means that this specific area and this specific front of the Great War changes this game entirely. It is one of the most beautiful games I've seen from a, granted, pretty small developer, if I'm going to be completely honest, and they've managed to do it completely justice. It ties into the broader first-person shooter that we know, whether it is a Battlefield 1 or even a Hell Let Loose, but because it's set in the First World War, and because it's focusing on this very niche front, it means that we get an incredibly unique experience, not just sound design, but visually, gameplay-wise, and map-wise as well. And I've pretty much not had any experience like this in any other game. And for that reason, I think it's kind of the reason that this title still is pretty popular. The reviews are pretty decent. Progression is, well, not the best. It's kind of slow and there isn't too much to go apart. But if you just love an authentic World War I game, there is no better than Isonzo. In terms of the World War I series, it is the best. I hope Gallipoli follows in this sort of direction, and it looks like from the trailers and some of the bits that we've seen, that is going to be the case. Isonzo is the peak of World War I series at this point in time. Better than Verdun? Yes. Better than Tannenberg? Most definitely. It offers a very distinctive taste on the World War I FPS. Vertical terrain, team tactics, historical authenticity, mountain warfare. Can this game bring the Italian front to a new generation of players? Maybe. I think in terms of its, well, future, there is definitely a question mark in the air, because this World War I series has had a bit of a tricky past with keeping players. Whilst it is an 81% of positive reviews on Steam at this point in time, its 24-hour peak is still under 500 players, which is enough to get a game, but is it enough to keep the title going? You see, these games peak really on release and huge updates, but apart from that, they kind of just patter along. The thing is, they have bots, so you can always go back to playing with bots, and they're pretty fun to play against. But normally what we see is a new game will come out, like Gallipoli in this case, and then the cycle will start again. The player base rises, the player base starts to fall, a new game comes out. Of course, this is really just the direction that the World War I series has planned to go. Whether they should be all in one title, maybe, but I think for them, for the size of company that Blackmail Games are, it's probably too many eggs in one basket. But we'll have to see what the future holds. Can Gallipoli keep this direction? I really goddamn hope so, because there is something very special in this series. Perhaps not reaching into the full mainstream, but for us, the people that like this sort of thing, there is really nothing better. And Isonzo proved that not only can a World War I game be fun, but it can be incredibly polished and feel like you're playing something big budget, despite it actually not being that. It just feels so well done. Historically accurate tactical trench warfare. Yes, that's what I'm talking about in the Great War Western Front. Tanks, planes, battle abilities, and hordes of infantry. And when I say hordes, I mean it's like you're throwing rice grains into a sandpaper machine. This is what the Great War Western Front sets out to deliver. And does it do it? Yes and no. It's a punishing, traditional strategy game, I guess. It's not one that's about flashy victories, but it's about surviving the grind. This is kind of the perfect blend between total war game, maybe even a grand strategy as well. There are tech trees, regional defenses, dynamic events that can raise or shatter your nationale, and morale is such an important factor of this game. In my point of view, it's still probably one of the better World War I strategy games out there, at least at this point in time. It's been out for about a year now, so I thought I'd jump into it and pop it in this video just to see if it still holds up, if the developers have improved on some of the issues that, well, a lot of people didn't enjoy on launch, and whether it's actually worth the $35 price tag that it is today. So let's talk a little bit about the context. It's entirely focused on the Western Front. Unlike Isonzo or Verdun, this is not really going into any other of the fronts. This is the traditional trenches in France that we all know. Brutal stalemates, mud, attrition, it's all there. Conflict that's notoriously hard to turn into, well, a fun game. It's a little bit gruesome, and you do sort of get that picture within this title. I mean, the Western Front is a game that I had to completely change the way that I played strategy games in order to actually start to understand, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. The point of World War I is that progress was slow, and you have to remember that coming into this RTS. Petroglyph Games, who actually are a studio behind Command and Conquer and Empire at War, do you remember that Star Wars game? They took on the challenge to try and make this a World War I strategy. Working with the Imperial War Museum to ground the game in real history, they used authentic maps, uniforms, and weapon design to create the look and feel of the First World War. Now, of course, because it's developed by former Command and Conquer developers, this isn't your typical real-time strategy game. It really blends that grand campaign of Western Europe with the tactical real-time battles that feel a little bit like Total War as mentioned, but a much heavier focus on trenches and, well, sending men into a meat grinder, and you're going to have to adapt to that playstyle to really get anywhere here. You can play as either the Central Powers or the Entente in a campaign, but unlike most strategy games, your goal isn't to conquer all of Europe. It's to maintain your nationality whilst wearing down your enemies. It's basically the morale for your country. If you lose battles, it goes down. If you win, it goes up. Through decisive victories, new technologies, and special events, you can boost your will, but losing battles, territory, or too many men, as mentioned before, even if you win a battle but you just send too many guys into the grinder, it will chip away at this nationale, and that's a delicate balance that you've really got to think about, especially if you want to get to the end of this campaign. And it's pretty tricky. It is a grueling thing. This is not an easy game, to say the least. You'll be fighting against AI, of course, but this AI is pretty brutal. They will send a few little troops and regiments at you at the start, but once they get going, those waves just come and come and come, and there is no stopping them. There's also things called supplies. These are another big mechanic within the game. You need them for everything. Building trenches, deploying artillery, calling in air support. If you run out mid-battle, you're pretty much done. So let's say I was, I don't know, calling in some troops and we were defending some trenches. And then there were some enemies attacking. Okay, I lost one regiment. That's fine. I can call in some more. Oh, I'm out of supplies. Well, that battle is pretty much over. So these are things that you have to think about quite a lot. And that's not even getting into air support or building additional trenches. Sure, you can use up gold reserves between turns to restock. These are an extra resource that you have as well. But during combat, you are stuck with whatever you've bought. Managing that flow of supply is one of the game's toughest and more satisfying challenges. I mean, there was one mission where I definitely overspent pretty early on. I got it into my head that I had to just use waves and waves of enemies, because my first game, I was being very selective, maybe 1 or 2 regiments at a time, pushing and pulling, waiting for the enemy to come and then counterattacking, and it went all right. But I decided that actually the enemy was sending 4 or 5 regiments charging at me, so I'd send about 6 or 7. And sure, I managed to swamp the enemy, but eventually they managed to wore me down and I ran out of supplies, and that was that battle over. You can see the campaign, especially if you start off, you can see the fronts that have been formed, and you can take each of these regiments and move them forward a bit like pieces on a chessboard. Of course, it's not as in-depth as any sort of grand strategy or even Total War or the overworld map in something like Mount and Blade. It's not even close to that, but it is a good representation of your regiments and detachments, the troops you have and the troops the enemies have, so you can make decisions of battles that you want to go into. Then, when you decide to attack, you zoom down into the RTS battles as you would expect. Now, let's talk about technology trees. There are 5 research branches: intelligence, logistics, engineering, flight, and infantry, each changing how you approach the war. I found that focusing a lot on logistics is almost essential early on to boost supply generation, but after that you can kind of specialize, maybe you want to go flight for recon or bombing runs, or maybe just focus on engineering to develop stronger trench networks. There are cool trenches that you can sit men inside, or trenches that just give a bonus if your men walk over them into battle. Personally, I kind of decided to go all out on the trench upgrades because, boy oh boy oh boy, sitting and being defensive is so much more powerful. Because eventually you have to charge over no man's land, and if you can make the enemy do it first, they're going to go through pretty much their entire platoons. You can literally sit there with one MG and spray down troop after troop, or you can put proper bunkers down, and even if they have artillery or bombing runs, you can pretty much defend your men from over the head attacks. But of course it gets more brutal when they charge in infantry with artillery because, well, that's when the bayonet starts. You see, most of these battles consist of sitting in trenches and spraying down waves and waves of enemies, but once the trench fighting gets into it, it's really just who has the most units in that trench, 1 or 2 or 3, and the person that has the most, well, they're going to win that hand-to-hand combat. And it feels just as brutal as you can really expect with this sort of thing. It's genuinely a pretty deep system, this whole technology tree, that lets you tailor your playstyle, and I think a lot of strategy games do this, but having it in a World War I setting is a lot more unique. And this is where the games really shine, when you get into these battles. Each battle begins with a setup phase, placing your trenches, your artillery, even observation balloons in order to let you see more line of sight. They will reveal parts of the enemy lines, so they are pretty vital, but of course they can be very easy to lose, i.e. shot out the air. On the defense, you can wait for your charge. On an offensive, you can plan artillery barrages and coordinate your pushes. The first few battles always, well, were tricky. They were a bit of a learning curve for me, and whilst you can do some tutorials and some historical battles just to get the hang of it, I mean, playing the Somme was just as brutal as I'd expected. Sending waves and waves of infantry across no man's land felt like a huge gamble. Most of the time, you're just watching men vanish under machine gun fire, and you have to be so careful about where you send men, what angle you send men at, because the infantry will only shoot at the angle their trench is facing, so sometimes you can actually get some good flanks. But if you charge your infantry straight on at a trench with just one squad of riflemen in, it doesn't matter how many men you have, you are done for. It is brutal. As the campaign progresses, you can unlock new tech like gas shells, precise artillery fire, heavier tanks, bombers, and tanks are especially satisfying. Slow, but as devastating as that Netflix film All Quiet on the Western Front. Don't even remind me of that one. Jesus Christ. I think one of my favorite points of this game is that it has the persistent battlefields. When you fight in the same region twice, the map remembers the destruction that's happened. There'll be craters and collapsed trenches and wreckage remains. The weather and the seasons, they change the look and the tactics of the fight, from summer offenses to frozen winter slogs. It's really one of the games that shows the true cost of war over time. Returning to the map can be worse than before. The battle can be changed. You have to change the way that you actually focus on attacking or defending the enemy. And I think it's a pretty decent experience overall, but it's not perfect. In fact, it is quite far from perfect. You might notice that it isn't exactly the most highly rated World War I game on Steam. And this is because of its rough edges. The UI, pretty clunky. Pacing can be a bit off and battles start to feel somewhat repetitive. At the start, it's satisfying seeing hundreds and hundreds of troops charging across no man's land, but if I'm going to be completely honest, that really starts to wear thin when that's all you're doing time and time again. Don't get me wrong, it gets the stalemate and the attrition right, but not necessarily the pacing of these battles for a gameplay point of view. Of course, Steam reviews hovering around mixed, I think is pretty fair. It's a game that definitely awards patience, not adrenaline, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. So it really caters towards more of a niche audience, but that's kind of what you can expect with a World War I title. And I'll admit it myself, after a few campaigns and a few battles, I needed a bit of a break. I kept coming back because I just wanted to charge more men into the fray, but doesn't really scratch that World War I itch like, I don't know, the Napoleon Total War World War I mod did. That was fantastic, and if I could recommend a World War I strategy, that mod is still probably the best you're going to get for any sort of World War I experience within the strategy genre. Yeah, I know, I just recommended a Total War game about Napoleon in a World War I video. It's a mod though, I guess it still counts. Maybe one day I make a full video about that. Okay, I wanted to go back to Mount & Blade Napoleonic Wars, not for any particular reason of the game that I'm covering, except from maybe. You see, we've already done Over the Top, which was kind of based off what that title really set up, but not more so than this game. I mean, imagine charging over tangled wire into the trenches, shoulder to shoulder, and of course, fighting on boats with dreadnoughts and cannons. This is what Holdfast Frontline sets out to deliver. This isn't your regular run and gun shooter. It is a huge, large scale, quite a bit like Over the Top, but a bit more refined and a bit more polished. And I would say the best total conversion DLC that has ever been for these types of games. I mean, Holdfast Frontlines at War came out quite some time ago now. The Napoleonic Wars standalone spin-off of kind of Mount and Blade's Napoleonic Wars. It was built by Anvil Studios, who actually made, a lot of them worked on the Napoleonic Wars mod as well, and they went and made their own standalone game. And more recently, they've had a free total conversion DLC to put this Napoleonic Wars into the First World War. Now, the servers are still pretty full. You can actually get in it, especially when it's events. It's not exactly going to be 150 plus players on every single game like advertised. That was the initial idea, but if I'm going to be honest, there hasn't really been the huge resurgence of player base since it initially came out. But you are properly dropped into muddy trenches with barbed wire and broken buildings. There's artillery hitting everywhere, and of course, people have voice over IP, which makes for some of the most entertaining aspects of this game. The interesting part is actually where it came from, though. Originally focused on the Napoleonic Wars with bright uniforms and muskets and cavalry chargers. In fact, I played Holdfast in its early testing phases. And the fact that it's come this way and begun to become this incredibly viral game now is kind of insane to see. And it does actually work quite well going into the World War I style. It's weird how Napoleonic Wars games seem to fit World War I quite well. I mean, I guess there's only 100 years apart from these conflicts. The weaponry's kind of similar, musket versus bolt action rifle. Yeah, it's not the biggest stretch in the world, and at its heart, it still feels like Holdfast Frontlines of War. Not just this, but you're able to get all of the authentic World War I weaponry. Of course, there's whole era-specific things like standard rifles, the MG08s, Vickers machine guns, grenades, mortars, howitzers. It is actually insane. There's a game mode called Offensive, which is a huge linear capture of strategic positions and kind of this tug-of-war style that you'd, well, appreciate in the World War I simulation. You can fight in huge games, and that's really what they're trying to do. Now, Holdfast has always been about its regiment play. In the Napoleonic Wars version, it was always about regiments, clans joined together and going into these big, well, organized battles, and it is no different here. They pretty much do exactly the same thing in World War I. Just a bit less popular. But instead of the 18th century battlefields, now we're in the trenches. Smoky skies, and yes, there is smoke grenades that just line the battlefield. There's lots of weight to every single action within this game because you will die instantly. Is it the most hardcore thing? Not exactly, but it is a lot of fun. And this is where voiceover IP comes in. You've all seen the clips of Holdfast Frontlines of War and maybe even Holdfast Frontlines of people shouting and charging and role-playing within this game, and it is no different when you're actually in there. And this is kind of where its selling point is. More recently, they've just added in naval warfare as well, being able to get on the back of boats and, of course, fire from these huge dreadnoughts, being able to be on land defending from attacks. And I mean, I think I should probably just show you how insane this game is.
Where are we going? Head towards the shoreline!
Yeah, no, I'm trying to make a big turn. Oh, god damn it. This is a fucking massacre. Okay, I gotta figure out a plan. Oh, wait, I got a plan. Fuck. Come on. Oh, god, look at the docks. He's spawn killing us.
No, we know. Right, you're not doing great under pressure there, I'm not gonna lie.
You gotta suck it in. We'll be okay. Just go. The reason we all got hit with that is because we were right next to the other boat.
Oh god. Okay, guys, take out your rifle.
Use the rocks.
Take out
Use
your
the
rifles.
rocks.
Now.
Use the rocks.
Rifles out. Guys, it's the 5th time this time the German pushed us back. We deserve to lose this war.
So, what does Holdfast Frontlines do pretty well? When the servers are full and organized, the experience is incredible. The scale alone gives it that feel that you're part of something big. the specific weapons to the era, they really do matter. Like MGs do mow down waves and waves, howitzers reshape terrain and cause craters, smoke screens for assaults, and all of this contributes to that Great War feel. Community and voice chat, always a major win, make each match way more than just a firefight. They become memorable and they kind of become their own little moments. You'll always have something to call back on when you've played a game like this. Moreover, it's also the fact that this is free. I mean, that's crazy. It shows the developer's commitment to the game. If you have Holdfast Frontlines support, you can actually just play this version. I mean, I jumped into this after quite a while just to test the game out and see how it was going, and I was immediately struck by how many, well, fun experiences I had, despite it not exactly being the most popular game anymore. The layout of the maps, the shell created dirt, the visibility of other teams charging, it all adds up to feel like a giant multiplayer event if you can get in at the right time. And of course, you can play as pretty much any role you want, whether that's an officer or a gunner or even a ship steerer. I'm not sure that's an official role in the game, but I'm sure there's a very possible way of doing such a thing. So, is Holdfast Frontlines worth your time? My answer is probably yes, but with some caveats. If you're someone that likes the large historical battles, then of course, there's going to be a lot here for you. There's nothing else quite like 150-player World War I trench warfare. If you're someone that prefers smaller skirmishes, single-player campaigns, strategy stuff, this probably isn't the game because it kind of relies on coordination. If you can get a good battle on this, it really peaks, but it is dependent on the player base at that time. If there's been any new major updates or there's any organized event. So if you do pick it up, try playing during that peak time, or maybe even join a regiment or community event and be ready for chaotic teamwork and occasional, well, death. The immersion, the fun, the sheer scale delivers something pretty special, and ultimately Holdfast Frontlines is not a perfect game. It's pretty niche and very player-based dependent with some rough edges, but when it works, when the servers are full, when the artillery's going, it is one of the best and most fun World War I games out there.
So, there we have it. 5 of my favourite World War I games that are currently out at this point in time. If you want strategy, of course the Western Front is really the one for you. If you want fun insanity, Holdfast Frontlines is gonna be the pick. But really overall, I think Isonzo and the World War I series have nailed it down to a T. And that FPS has still got something fantastic going for it. And of course, Gallipoli is now on the horizon, so there'll be a new game within that series. So if I were you, I'd probably start getting to grips with it pretty goddamn soon.